Of all the cautionary tales we've seen in Hollywood till date, one stands out in a league of its own, the story of Rachel Zegler. Never before had we seen an artist so consumed by a battle they had no stake in, trying to appear as a hero for the sake of appearances without a care or worry in the world about what kind of damage they're doing to everyone around them, while also completely sabotaging an opportunity and position that most people would kill for. Move over Brie Larson and Amber Heard because the undisputed queen is here. I remember reading a comment somewhere that said Larson walked so Zegler could run, which does ring true to an extent, but my take is that Zegler pulled off the unthinkable and create an unseen, unheard of, unmitigated disaster that has left a wake of career corpses in its path, a woman-made catastrophe which will and should never be replicated again. All the events leading up to the release of the film are well documented, including in a video which was made by yours truly months ago, and everyone keeping an eye on the project already knew that it was gonna bomb, and it did. But not even the biggest detractors of the film had imagined how hard the crash was gonna be. Not only was it critically panned by most paid critics, well, even they couldn't bullshit their way through this one, I guess, and torn into pieces by audiences who gave it a 1.3 out of 5 on Google reviews, where the very few people who gave it 5 on 5 had to point out that they weren't bots, because most 5-star reviews were literally paraphrased with little difference, and it also got an abysmal 2.1 out of 10 on IMDb, which gets it close to the critical failure of the decade, Queen Cleopatra. It was also a commercial failure in every way imaginable, which rivaled and beat another feminist bullshit mega project, namely The Marvels, which featured the girl boss at the time, Brie Larson, by making $400,000 less.
Details matter.
But only a select few people are aware of the dire consequences that Disney and everyone, and I mean everyone associated to the project, had to face. Let's talk about the one person who had a ton of direct animosity with Zegler, Gal Gadot. The fallout for her was so bad for a plethora of different reasons. She up and disappeared from the public eye after the film failed for nearly 6 months until about 2 days ago, where she gave her first interview since the film's release with the most diplomatic answers possible, mostly because she actually has a brain and knows that airing dirty laundry will only make her a pariah in the industry, something that Zegler has refused to accept and understand to this day. Her visible discomfort around Zegler during the severely underpromoted premiere for the film was something that still makes me uncomfortable. Also, it was the biggest financial disappointment in Gadot's resume, who also happened to be the highest paid star in the project. But the worst thing that happened to her was that her inability to act was exposed in a bad way. Because up until Snow White, the audiences had mostly seen her in ensemble films, where she was surrounded by a ton of capable actors, so her beauty was enough to carry her through the film, and in the 1 or 2 films where she was the only big name star, the script, the execution, or a total lack of visibility kept her safe from absolute career damage. But Snow White became the kind of radioactive project that would wreck even good actors' careers, so it was pretty much devastating for Gadot. Oh, speaking of devastation, Disney took a hit for the ages. It was as if the company was toppled with a tsunami during a famine. The same company that could do no wrong from 2008 to 2020 seemed like its fortunes had been turned upside down since 2022. The company was in need of a big hit in a bad way. And Snow White had always been considered a fail-safe project, which Disney had been keeping in its back pocket to deploy when all else had failed. But the film was a financial holocaust, because not only did it not make any money, instead the film ended up losing about $450 million. The original intended budget for the film was supposed to be in the ballpark of $200 million, but the absolute resentment that the first look and the 7 non-binary gender-fluid people received by the audiences forced the studio to pivot hard, and they had to shell out another $70 million to create CGI dwarfs and change the entire project midway, which made the film pretty darn incoherent, and the shoddy and rushed VFX made it look more like a horror flick than a fantasy film. And as the budget was growing, the faith and the goodwill of the audiences towards the company and the film particularly was declining fast, mainly because of Zegler's antics in the public space. All they had to do was hire the nanny from the Babysitter movie and the problem would be solved. But by the time the post-production was finished, so was Zegler and the project itself. There was pretty much nothing left to salvage. With a combined production budget of $270 million and a hefty marketing bill of about $120 million, the total budget of Snow White came up to $390 million, which meant that the break-even point was somewhere in the $1 to $1.2 billion range. To all those who don't understand how that works, I've made a video where I explain the whole finances of Hollywood in detail, so please go check that out. And on top of falling about 800 million to a billion short of breaking even, the amount of total loss incurred, including severely underperforming merchandise sales, theme parks visitors lost, and Disney Plus subscriber revenue that never came in because of how terribly the film was received by the audiences meant even more loss for Disney, a once family-friendly brand which got in too deep with the woke crowd and hired an actress who was the very embodiment of the agenda they were pushing, had now cost them $1 billion dollars. And the public fallout between Zegler and one of the producer Mark Platt's son, Yono Platt, who directly pushed Zegler under the bus, blaming her for the film tanking, and rightfully so, also made Disney look divided and out of any kind of control over the producers and the cast, which was a terrible image for them. It also brought Bob Iger under heavy fire, whose decisions as the CEO were being largely scrutinized. The company was in fact so shaken it indefinitely delayed the live-action remake of Tangled, which was also dubbed a guaranteed billion-dollar movie prior to Snow White's release. But the whole fiasco had alienated ticket-buying audiences to an extent that releasing any legacy project in the foreseeable future would almost be a guaranteed catastrophe. The only person who came out with arguably the least damage was the director Mark Webb. Although the project tanked hard, it was very evident that the filmmaker had little to no control over the creative process and the big mouth of one Rachel Zegler, so people recognized Webb's helplessness and his career somehow escaped while it still had some semblance of life. But now let's talk about the one person whose career Rachel Zegler completely destroyed, Rachel Zegler. The one person who lost more than anyone else due to her shenanigans was herself. Zegler had it all. A promising career, lead roles in mega-budgeted projects with the biggest studios in the world, and a chance to launch herself into superstardom at a very early age to then hopefully build a career that would be long and fruitful. Instead, she chose the path of senseless activism and lost it all. Well, go woke, go broke couldn't be more relatable to anyone else. And as of 2025, no big studio would touch her, not a single respected filmmaker would risk working with her, and although she's still in the acting scene doing theatre, it hasn't and probably will never be the same for Zegler. And she did exactly what every sane person expected her to do, play the victim. Since the Snow White disaster, she's given multiple interviews where she spoke about how this whole situation has affected her mental health and all the struggles she's had coping with the stress, not once acknowledging that the whole mess is her own fault. And to all those people who want to support Zegler and try to make her out as a martyr who sacrificed all she had for what she believed in, I ask you, did she have no moral obligation to protect the studio and the project that had paid millions of dollars to her? Not as hush money but as a salary, which meant she owed Disney some loyalty. I don't personally like the company, I think they deserved everything that they got. But if I was working for them and actively being paid a salary, I definitely would behave at least to protect the entity that's keeping food on my table. But in her blind hate for the right wing and her personal beliefs, which she could have totally kept private, which by the way didn't make an iota of difference in the end, she ended up sinking the whole ship while senselessly and mercilessly sacrificing others for a cause that she believed in and for matters of international diplomacy that she probably doesn't even understand. That's it for today, folks. I'm gonna go have some pineapple pastry.